Wonderful party at his home, I remember. And so we had quite a bit of activities. We had and we had the graduation. I think it was outdoors, outside the chapel.
Was it in the park up there? Or what?
No, I think it was right outside the so-called chapel, as I remember it. And that's when all these people that I still are good friends with, we were all in the same class.
No.
And the Ma'i Day was a big deal, as I remember they even had a parade with balloons.
Do you remember how that all got started? Why did we have this parade in May? It was just historic, but when did it really get rolling? What happened?
It started long before I had it. It was in the days of Mildred, as I remember the story of Mildred, who later became Mrs. Chester Lynn, Mildred Lynn, whom I used to take to alumni things, and I think she was the first Ma'i Day princess.
Is that right?
But now August Trimble could tell you a great deal about that.
And we'll ask her about that.
Now, she would know all about it.
It's an interesting history to that and how it really got started. Now, it must have seemed in 1928 or so that you had a lot of time on your hands. You were only going to go to one school then. You were done with college.
But then I was working full-time at my dad's office.
So you were really full-time over here.
Yeah, that's right.
And a year later?
And a year later, then I got my Bachelor of Law degree. And in our law class, there were about, well, I think we probably graduated about 12. And you see, all of the students there were people that worked during the day and would go to law school at night. And, of course, would never been able to have a legal education if it hadn't been for the night law school. And there again, I remained friends with several of the fellows that graduated with me.
Didn't you feel at times in those late 20s and early 30s as you really moved in as a lawyer like you were sort of alone? Because there weren't very many women in the profession. Didn't people kind of look twice at you?
Well,
What's she doing in that kind of work?
No, I was just kind of accepted all along. I don't remember, and I can remember I passed the bar exam and down in Lincoln in June 20th, 1929, and in those days the bar exam was all in writing. There wasn't any, I don't know, I think there's part oral now. And it took us a day, maybe a day and a half. And of course we were examined on everything that we had studied in law school, all criminal law, civil law, and all the phases of it. And of course we had all studied. I don't think I was ever smarter in my whole life than the night before I took the bar exam. And
really prepped for it.
You bet. And so they would grade, the committee would grade the papers as we went along. So by the time we finished, within hours, we knew whether we were...
That was nice. You didn't have to wait for weeks to find out.
And then we all stayed over and were sworn in the next morning in front of the Supreme Court. And I remember calling home, of course, to tell them, which was in those days, calling long distance was a great luxury, and to tell them that I'd passed and would be home the next day. And I was riding with Mr. Cockle, who owned the Cockle Printing Company, and his wife had ridden down with us. She was studying law just mostly for the fun of it, and she asked us questions all the way down to Lincoln, I remember. And then we stopped to visit some relatives of theirs, in a small town on the way home. So I didn't get home till late afternoon. Well, the next morning when I came to the office, and my dad was then on 14 in this building, he had my name on the door.
He was all ready for you.
He was ready for me. And of course, I more or less the first maybe year or so, I continued to do his stenographic work, and their law business wasn't all that big in those days. But my very first client.
I was going to ask you who your first client was.
My very first client was Dr. Kuhn, who taught German out at the university, and he had some rental property, and the people owed, I don't know, month's rent, maybe $20, something like that. And so he came to me, and I filed suit, and I was, you would have thought that I was appearing before the Supreme Tribunal. I was so nervous the night before, and my brother, Herb, who was older and had been a lawyer 2-3 years, said, "Oh, don't worry, he won't show up, and the judge will give you, the judgment, and that'll be it." So I went up to Muni Court, and we had one of the most difficult of the municipal judges. He was a little bit testy, and I don't think he was too impressed with me. And because I was quite young, because by going day and night, I was just 21 when I became a lawyer.
My word, that is unusual.
And so the clerk called the case, and the defendant came walking forward.
Yeah.
And I nearly Well, I nearly fainted, and I wished the world would open up and swallow me. And so he walked up to the bench, and the judge said to him, "Are you so-and-so, and do you owe this bill?" And he said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "I got the money here." And the only time in my whole life, Paul, when anybody has come to court with the money to pay, the judgment wasn't in it.
I have it here in cash.
I have it here in cash. So, and then, of course, we always did a lot of real estate and estates, which is, of course, the nicest part of the law business. And my dad, naturally, because he'd been in practice so many years, and he always had a lot of farmer with these wonderful farmer clients, and a lot of the truck farmers and that sort of thing. And so every farmer had 12 kids. And, of course, in those days, we didn't have Xerox, so you'd have to carbon all the reports and stuff. And I would sit, I remember, and type reports, because my dad would put down every penny that came in, every penny that went out.
Lots of carbon copies.
Yeah, lots of carbon copies. So anyways, the university at that time, the night law school was held at 13th and Farnham Street on the 3rd floor. And we had also, at that time, judges and lawyers as our teachers, some marvelous
Most of the
teachers.
faculty was made up of practicing lawyers and judges.
They all were. And there again, I had a couple of great teachers. Dave Swore, who taught us real estate, was simply marvelous. And so I felt that we got a very wonderful education and very practical. See, many of the fellows that were going there would have other jobs, and they were doing this to increase.
Well, as you did when you were in school, you were doing 2 or 3 things at one time.
And of course it was adult education was what it amounted to.
But in that period we're talking about, the Depression is coming on and so on, and things were tough, weren't they?
If you could get a job for $7 a week, you were lucky.
Yeah. And everything was small and cheap, but hardly.
It was cheap, but you didn't have the money to pay for it.
You didn't have the money to pay for it. But in that period we're talking into now, shortly after you graduated and became a practicing lawyer, that was the period when the decision was finally made, wasn't it? Or there was attempts being made there were attempts being made to have the city take over the university.
Yeah.
Do you remember anything of that period and what went on in that period?
Well, I do, because I was, of course, terribly interested, and we had a young girl working for us at the time, part-time, and she was a student out at the university, and she was very involved in the campaign, and my brother Howard was a student out there at that time, and they went around, and door to door and got people to vote for it.
They had a lot of student involvement, didn't they?
Yeah, because as I understand, the university as a private institution was done for. They had no endowment, and they just couldn't handle it.
Was the enrollment about the same or going down a little during that Depression period?
Paul. I really don't. But actually, the university would have been out of existence if it hadn't been taken over, and I think it was a very wonderful solution. And in my book, maybe I shouldn't say this out loud, but in my book, the glory days of the university was when it was municipal, when it was smaller and the faculty was intimate and knew each other. And
you're talking about the 30s and early 40s, aren't you?
Yeah. Well, and even up until the time when the merger took place with the state, because I was on the Board of Regents at that time, and it was heartbreaking that we had to do it because we lost our family feeling. And in those days, you see, everybody, as you know, the faculty all knew each other. And
it was a very cozy place.
It really was.
But again, financially, it was a problem for the future.
We were told by Terry Carpenter that if we didn't make the move, why the legislature would make the move, and we certainly didn't want to deprive Omaha of our great school.
You know, that first big move, though, the vote to make it municipal, Bill Thompson, whom you knew so well and was a wonderful man, he visited with me in these reflections before he died, and he talked about one of the reasons that the vote went our way was because of all the work the students had done, but also there was a big rain the night before, and it was so muddy. A lot of the people that he thought were going to vote against it didn't.
That's cute. I'd never heard that. I don't have any idea, Paul, what the vote was. Do you know?
I don't know how close it was. Maybe from someone we can find out, but I have no indication of really how resoundingly the people of Omaha said yes or no, but they did, and we gave us new life, really.
It gave us new life, and then the big question was where to move.
Yeah.
And they moved way out on 60 60-something in Dodge Street.
Now, I bet that caused some consternation. Why are you moving it out there, I suppose,
Yeah.
was said, and things
Yeah,
like that.
of course, a lot of people want to keep it in the North Omaha.
Sure.
Some wanted to move way down to South Omaha. And I, of course, wasn't involved so much. I would go to alumni meetings a little bit. But for a period there, I wasn't too involved with
Those
the
were your
university.
young days in the legal profession.
Oh,
You
yeah.
were very busy, I imagine, among
Oh,
other
well,
things.
not so much busy, but you know how your interests change. And I was getting very active in civic things at that time, Chamber of Commerce and that sort of thing, and Urban League, and so.
In those early days that you went to the university, and before you graduated, what sort of a reputation did our university have as a school? Was it well accepted? Did people compare it to Creighton or the University of Nebraska? What were people saying about the school?
We didn't care. We didn't pay much attention. I'm sure that all my rich friends that graduated me from Central, you know, sort of looked down upon us, but we didn't. You know, you were young and you didn't think anything about it. I don't remember. Of course, Creighton wasn't all that great either at that time, you know. And I've always felt, and I will defend to the hilt, the education that all of us received at the old university in the academic part and at law school with anybody else's education. I really will, because we had a really, I often marvel at the great teachers that we had that stayed there. And because I'm sure they weren't paid very much.
No, no.
But of course, I think it was and of course there wasn't, you know, all the facilities for research and writing papers and that, but it's really interesting. Of course, it was the Times, Paul, you know.
Yeah, but we didn't necessarily equate size with goodness, did we?
No, not at all.
Small was pretty good often.
It sure was. And even the University of Nebraska-Lincoln wasn't all that big.
So,
And I remember, it seemed to me once we had a winning basketball team, and that was real good.
when the campus did move, do you remember Dodge Street and what things looked like out there? It was mainly just the building wasn't there.
And it was the first air-conditioned university in the country.
That was really
And of course,
innovative,
at that
wasn't it?
time, Dr. Haynes was president. And I can so well remember that, and I forget if I was on the alumni board, but anyways, a group of us were invited out there, either shortly after the building was finished or before, and Mr. Latenzer, a dear, wonderful John Latenzer, whom I got to know very well when I was on the Board of Regents. And he walked us around, and oh my,
Wasn't that
he
a
was
sparkling
so,
new air-conditioned building?
oh, it was beautiful, just beautiful.
We need to pause again, Margaret. We've run out of tape, and we have another segment. We'll pick it up with that beautiful new building out at the new site when we come back in segment 4 of our Reflection in Time with Margaret Fischer. Well, we're beginning our 4th segment of visiting and reflections in time in the summer of 1982 with our friend Margaret Fischer, who graduated from our university in 1928. But we moved beyond that now, and Margaret has taken us just in the last moments as we ended that 3rd tape through this shiny, new, beautiful, built by government money, new
On
building.
how many acres?
Yeah, on 52 acres.
Well, all of us, I'm sure that, again, hindsight, it's just tragic that the university didn't buy all the acres to the west, because, you see, there weren't any houses on it, hardly at all, and of course, Fair Acres was there, but it was, you know, farther back. And
do you have any idea, legally or for any other reasons, why we just didn't
I
do
suppose they
anymore?
didn't have the money. See, I was not really involved with any phase of the university except the Alumni Association, so I don't have any idea. I know there was a lot of controversy in the board, and you see, the board of the municipal university was appointed by the school board.
That's right.
And I remember they were on the front pages of the paper. There were a lot of problems. Then when I was nominated for the Board of Regents, Dr. Was it Seelock that was there? Before
Dr.
Kirk,
Bale?
Before Dr. Naylor.
Before Dr. Naylor.
Before Dr.
There was Dr. Trawick.
Trawick, yeah. See, I was on when Dr. Trawick was, and I was involved in his inauguration, and I think one of the nicest things that ever happened to me was when I was chosen by the school board to be on the board of the Municipal University of Omaha. It was a very, very enriching experience.
You started to get a different look at the university,
oh,
didn't
yes.
you then?
Oh, yes. And we were there during all the, you know, the building after building, and never went to a Board of Regents meeting that they weren't digging up the campus someplace. And of course, very, very soon, the aesthetics of it were totally spoiled, and now I think it's an atrocity. The way they've got buildings stuck this way and that way, and the lovely, lovely old administration building, which still architecturally I think is beautiful. You know, it's lost.
Yes, that often happens when we build
yeah.
it. Things sort of get to be a hodgepodge, don't they?
Unless you have enough space.
Yeah.
And that's where, you mentioned I was on the board up and down, and that's where they're very fortunate, because you see they have plenty
Lots
of space, and they can put their buildings artistically.
As you think of the university as you've known it over these many, many years, since the 20s and on through the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, now into the 80s, what are the things as you look at it as a regent, as an alumnus, as a person who lives here in Omaha? What are some of the major things that you feel have changed a lot? You mentioned physically it became sort of a hodgepodge. Other things that you've noticed about your university?
Well, I do think that what the university has done in the field of adult education is absolutely thrilling. I knew Dr., the one that's back east now, that started the adult education department. What was his name?
Dean Emery did so much with it. He passed away just a year or two ago.
Well, there was somebody else.
Dean Hosman before him.
And you know, they started having all these wonderful night classes.
That was quite innovative, too, wasn't it?
It was very innovative, and I think another great thing that the university did is the GI, the military, bootstrap program. That was truly a wonderful, wonderful idea. And because our university was one of the very first that started it, you see, well, you know, some of the distinguished alumni that we have through the military. And it was always such a thrill, because when I was on the board, of course, we'd always be on the platform on graduation day, commencement. And when they would introduce the ones who were getting the degree, and I forget what the degree they called it, but to see all of them stand up, it was marvelous.
Who are some of the people that you remember that stood out in your life and memory that relate to the university? You've mentioned presidents and so on, and Del Ward. There are others over the years, perhaps, that you remember, students and faculty that have meant something to you. Well, of course, your friends always mean a great deal, and I cannot certainly but give great praise to Dr. Naylor, because I was there during the troubled times, and you know, and Dr. Naylor took over and really, that period shortly after the merger, really.
Yeah, again saved. Of course, Dr. Bale. See, I did not know I had my only connection with the university after it moved out on Dodge Street was through the alumni and going out to different things and whatnot. So but I got to know Dr. Bale, and of course he was marvelous.
Another dynamo.
You bet he was.
Yeah.
And it still is, as far as that goes. I see him occasionally at civic things. And, well, you know, well, the way I feel about the university, Paul, is if there hadn't been the University of Omaha when we were young, our family wouldn't have been able to have a college education. And I think that is so true today, that so many, many young people in Omaha would never be able to get a college education if it weren't for UNO. And you know, I really feel that they really are fulfilling the dream that Dr. Jenkins had when he started the university. Yeah, through all this process of change from a private school to municipal, to a state, the main value to the city has remained as a local university, not too expensive and helpful to all. Well, and as a cultural resource, too, as far as that goes. And no, one thing I want to... But really, you want to think, I just peeked into the new library, but when you compare that library with what we had in one little room out at 24th and Pratt. Your whole campus could fit in that building. But you wonder if the kids are any smarter than we were. That's interesting, you know. Or whether they were any better. I'm sure they weren't any better motivated. But they have more things they can work with, don't they? My. Like the cameras that are recording us today and that sort of thing. When they opened the new, one of the new buildings, they took the board well, well, see, then subsequently, lately, I have been on the Chancellor's Advisory Committee, so I've still had this lovely connection with the university, and we were taken through the new athletic thing.
Oh,
My
yes.
goodness gracious.
Health, physical education, and recreation.
Oh, is that something?
Marvelous plant.
And so, actually, as far as plant is concerned, I don't see how any university could have things any better than we have out at UNO. I really don't.
Let's make some quick observations on a few things here as we wind up this last segment together. Margaret, you've lived a lot of life, and you've been a professional person all your life, pretty much.
Right.
Is there anything else you ever wanted to be other than a lawyer?
I very briefly, and this is a deep, dark secret, I very briefly wanted to go into church work because I was so under the influence of this Dr. Vartanian and this organization that I can't think of it. Dr. Vartanian thought he could get me a scholarship to the that wonderful Bible school in New York City, and but that didn't last very long.
So
I really, no, I can honestly say this, that if everyone in the world were as lucky as I to be able to spend their life doing what they enjoy doing as much as I do, they'd be awfully lucky.
Dr. Bale once told me, when you get up in the morning and hate to go to the office, it's time to change jobs.
You bet it is, and I can honestly say that I really never have. And of course, my practice now is so beautiful because it's people-oriented, and I'm an old-fashioned lawyer, and would never want to be other than completely on my own. In other words, you know, being in with a firm of 120 lawyers would just absolutely overwhelm me.
Are there certain areas of the law that you found most rewarding and interesting? Certain areas that you like to work with?
Well, I work
others?
completely now with estates and wills and real estate. For many, many years, I handled domestic relations. I was the one-woman legal aid society before we had legal aid. Yeah, these poor women had come to me, and finally, about 15 years ago, I decided I didn't have to handle every divorce case that walked in, and you get awful tired of having calls at midnight from some woman whose husband's there beating her up or he didn't send the money, and and of course I love little kids, and it was heartbreaking. So I don't do any of that. Never did do criminal law. Never did do much personal injury, that type of thing. So in law, just like in any profession, like with teaching, you know, you get into what you like to do.
If someone sits down in our beautiful new library that you just described a moment ago, or at the Alumni Association in years to come, and they're a young person, and they haven't really gotten started yet, they're in high school, or they're thinking about they're thinking about an education, is there any advice that you would, from your long years of experience, like to share with people that are going to try to decide what they want to do and then do it?
No, I really don't know, because I do feel that now young people have many more. I think there were aptitude tests, as I remember, but I don't remember they were used.
Like that summer you went to summer school.
Yeah, that's right. And I don't remember if they were career aptitude tests or not, but gosh, the kids have such opportunities now and I think these marvelous scholarships, overseas scholarships, and you know, to me, if I were a young person now, I think the problem would be there's so many fields open to you.
So many chances, it's hard to decide.
It is hard to decide, that's right. But I do feel that if you start out, for instance, to become a teacher and find out you don't like it, you better get out of it. You better get into something else.
Goes back to what you were saying earlier about you better like what you're doing.
You bet, absolutely.
And you've loved it all your life.
I really have, I can honestly say that.
But you've maintained a lot of civic and other collegiate activities. You've related to our university and Dana.
Well, I've been very active up at Criss Memorial Church, too. I was the first, I've been the first so many things, Paul, that I was the first woman deacon, and I can remember when our dear Dr. DeFries came to Omaha, and I was on, the woman on board. Dr. Traub didn't mind women on, he thought it was kind of a neat idea, and I was nominated from the congregation and was elected sort of as a rebellion, you'd say, against these stuffy old men. And, of course, and Dr. DeFries was a little bit horrified when he came to Omaha and found that one of his deacons was a woman. And, of course, now we have about 4 or 5 of them on the board. And he always kids me about it. And and then, of course, I live with my family, and my sister has 2 children, and they each have 2 children. So I have had all the blessings of
You've had lots of people
a
around
grandmother.
you all your life.
Yeah, that's right. And we have done a lot of traveling, been all over the world.
That's sort of a hobby of yours, moving around?
Yeah. every place but China.
Is
I've
that
gotten
right?
too old for China now.
Well, we've been at it now, Margaret, for about an hour, and I want to thank you so sincerely for myself and for the university for your taking time to be with us on
Thank
this
you, Paul. I
reflection.
really enjoyed it. It's always nice to reminisce and to make people listen to you.
Yeah.
Because generally the young people like these sitting here, I'm afraid they'd get bored, but you see, it's part of their job. So
And
they
they'll
have to-
get back to watch this tape in years to come. Again,
That's
thanks
right.
so much
When
for
they're
being-
old.
Yeah. This has been our Reflections in Time with Margaret Fischer. We thank her and we thank all of you for being with us for another look at our university from Margaret Fischer's perspective.